What's up, everyone? Welcome to Chasing Signals, where I'm here with Ben Gretch, looking at the Week 15 slate slash all the games. We're going to be getting into a bunch of different stuff here, as we've done the last few weeks, just kind of cover an assortment of topics that's popped out to us as Ben has been doing stealing signals and all the stuff that kind of came out of that, and the stuff that's occurred to me from stat chasing and just some other interesting situations. So we're going to be kind of diving in to some of the underlying stats and just talk about what we think we can take from that going into Week 15. Ben, how you doing, man?
Good. How you doing?
Doing good.
I'm nervous. I'm gonna be honest. I wrote in signals either this week or last week how Week 14 is always kind of the most stressful week of the year, or the week that you'd think it would be Week 16, but I've just kind of learned over the years that Week 14 tends to matter more. And then Week 14 went really well for me, so now it's Week 15. I don't even know how many teams I'm juggling that are still in. It's at least like 10 to 12 out of, I don't know, 18 or so total leagues that I, had. And so I'm like in a really good spot to do very well for the overall season. But all it really takes is I have so many correlated teams that all it really takes is a couple of key guys for me to have a really bad week. And I've certainly had seasons where that's happened, and you get,
I know.
Everything goes well up until Week 15, and then you lose out in 75% of your leagues that week. And then you're like, man, I only have a couple teams through to the championship. I'm hoping to win one championship this year, a couple championships this year.
This is an unfortunate segue into our team that Pete and I have with Crack Rock in the main event, where we did start Keenan Allen last night.
Yeah,
after debating whether we should play Hunter Henry. Yeah, we did. We started Keenan Allen. We were leaning Allen, and then he did the don't sit me, and we were like, let's fucking go. Didn't work out.
I don't know how I could have got off that either. I thought about that actually as I watched the game. I have him in a Dynasty Best Ball semifinal that I'm in, and it would have been great to get a good game out of him, but that's the only real exposure I had to him. So I didn't have to make a lineup decision, which bad call by me to not have more exposure to him. But as I saw how he was kind of struggling, I was thinking about your guys' team. I was like, man, that Pat and Pete team with Crack Rock, I can't imagine how they could have gotten away from playing him.
Yeah. We afterwards you start to think we had Henry, Hawkinson, as we'll talk about, and maybe that's where we'll start here. But I'm a little bit concerned about him because of all the stuff with Stafford maybe not playing. So you could go, man, if we had started Henry, now we have Hawkinson becomes less of a necessity because he's now just a flex player. You could end up going with anybody. But
playing Henry over Allen, even not knowing.
Yeah, it just felt too thin.
There's just no way. I mean, the way as massive as Allen's target shares have been, I mean, even knowing that he wasn't going to play a ton, I still feel like his 50% target share has got to be somewhere close to Henry's overall target share, right? I mean, last night was Henry's. I don't know if it was a season high for him in fantasy points.
Close, if it wasn't the high.
It might have been the high. It was. I'm looking at it now. This is the only game he scored in where he caught 5 balls, and it was his fourth highest yardage total of the year. His other ones were in non-scoring games, so this had to have been it. 17.5 points in non-tight end premium. So in tight end premium, you got probably 20 even, and that's got to be his high, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Hawkinson. Let's dive into some of the topics here. If Hawkinson, if Stafford plays and he's limited, are you worried about that? And what if Stafford misses the game? How bad is that going to be for Hawkinson? This is something we're directly going to be trying to figure out for the Crack Rock team.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be good. And if Stafford's banged up, that none of that's good. Obviously, you want a healthy Stafford over any of those other options. At the same time, I thought the Lions' trends were really interesting last week, and we're obviously going to talk about the rookie running backs as well as we get going. But DeAndre Swift returned to a bigger share than I would have expected based on everything we've been hearing. He played 53% of the snaps. He was clearly leading the backfield. Peterson and Kerrane sort of split work behind him around 25% each, and then Swift was at the 50%, and then he's also getting the valuable work, the valuable snaps, the receptions and the goal line work. And so that was really encouraging for his return. And then you also look at Hawkinson, and you see he played a season-high snap share. He got a season-high 11 targets. And to me, I kind of lump those two things together, and that's sort of why I jumped in with Swift, in that you have an interim head coach. You have Matt Patricia having been fired. Their season's going nowhere. This feels very much like a team, and Darrell Bevell as a coach who's making the decisions right now that is saying we're going to let our young guys run a little bit down the stretch. And not every team approaches this differently or the same way, right? But it feels to me, with Swift playing more than I expected and Hawkinson now finally playing the season high, real full route share. We've talked before, obviously, that Hawkinson doesn't always play every down. He basically did. It feels promising for their usage over the next couple of weeks, right? Oh, we lost Pat's headphones. This is just like when we did our draft in the offseason, and he mistakenly drafted Jalen Reagor. Can you hear me, Pat?
You know what's hilarious? Yeah, my headphones, they just cut out. So now I came back to you talking about the last time they cut out. So, yeah.
Hey, we wound up with Jalen Reagor. Oh.
Zach Moss and Jalen Reagor, maybe. I'm hearing you. I don't know if you guys are hearing an echo because now I'm just going through my computer speakers. But
no, you sound great.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know. I missed what you said, but Hawkinson ran a lot of routes.
Basically, I was kind of just finishing the same point, but we have these two young guys that I think Bevell used enough that we have to be pretty. I mean, it looks optimistic for them that Bevell's going to let the young guys play down the stretch.
Yeah, and Hawkinson running that level of routes is a big deal because he has been seeing a really nice increase in his targets per route run over the last few weeks. So he'd been showing signs of just like being a more valuable piece of the offense for weeks now. And it's like a two-part thing. You need to get targeted when you're out on the field, and you need to be out on the field. Last week, his target per route run was 26%. The week before, it was 27%. The week before that, 20%. Those are all good to really good numbers for a tight end. He was at 25% the week before that, which is another really strong number. So you're starting to see Hawkinson emerge and have that late season breakout that we were really hoping he could. So him being out on the field
more as well. Yeah,
is really, really big. And on the season now, Hawkinson has been targeted on 22% of his routes. He's only run a route on 70% of dropbacks. So if we're going to see that now, maybe is like closer to his floor in terms of routes run, it's a really big deal. I still think the quarterback play.
Yeah, the QB play is a concern still, but like this is all very like it like offsets it, right? To some degree, like an uptick in routes, an uptick. I mean, you might lose a little efficiency. I think there's more ceiling for Hawkinson at a larger snap share, even because the efficiency could still be okay with Chase Daniel. You're talking about such a small sample of targets in any given game.
Yeah, and certainly, it means that he's more likely to score touchdowns. So, but I would say it offsets it in a way of like, with Chase Daniel, he's probably a similar play to the way you felt about Hawkinson in the mid-season portion.
That's what I was saying. Yeah. So it's increased in one way, and then the efficiency's decreased, but there's probably more ceiling now. There's probably also more floor if their whole offense sucks. But it is sort of like I don't think you shy away from him because there are some positive route and snap trends. Unless you have other phenomenal options, but I do feel confident this is going to stick. I mean, they also cut Marvin Hall out of the blue, and we're like, this guy's not a long-term piece. We're going to open up some snaps for Quintez Cephas, who's another rookie that they're getting some extra playing time to in the last couple of weeks. So,
yeah. And then how are you feeling about Swift? Because we did see him get a really nice role, as you mentioned, but it wasn't quite as big as we would have wanted. Of course, it was his first game back. So I'm pulling up his snaps share from previous weeks. I don't have it yet, but what are you expecting his role to grow going forward? Like as soon as this week, I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I haven't dug into like any practice report stuff, but is he practicing in full and doing like fine? Have you been looking at that?
I believe he is.
Yeah. I would expect it to grow from 54%. Like, he was out. This was all like a concern. He had the concussion. He had, a sickness either as a result of that or unrelated, which was never really made clear, at least to me. That all came immediately following his first major takeover of the backfield game where he played 73% of the snaps.
Yeah.
And then he misses the next 3 games and returns to a 54% snap share. That's his third highest of the year anyway. Like, he had played one other game at 62%, but for the most part all year, he's been in the 38 to 45% range. And in that range, he's still been playable at times. He's still actually shown a pretty solid ceiling because he's been a very efficient player. He's caught passes. He's had this high-value touches that we like. So he's caught a bunch of passes, and they're giving him green zone looks. He punched in a green zone touchdown last week. He caught 4 passes last week. He ran a ton of routes. He had everything you want at a higher snap share than he's had for most of the year. And I can't imagine it would go down this week, right? I think I would expect it to continue to grow. The only thing that he didn't have last week was the efficiency that we've seen. We've seen him make a bunch of splash plays. He ran for 3.4 yards a carry in last week's game. He only had 6.5 yards per reception. Those are both way down from his season averages. He's been at like 8.6 yards per reception, 4.6 yards per carry. So over a yard, 2 yards lower on the receiving side. He winds up with 50 total yards on 11 touches. Typically, throughout this year, when he's gotten 11 touches, he's gone for a little bit more than 50 total yards, basically, is the point. And I think we could see 15 to 20 touches here. And if that efficiency comes back, he's getting the right types of touches. I mean, there's a lot of upside there.
I agree. Yeah, and that's a great point about how his snaps are unlikely to decrease, assuming he plays the whole game, he's healthy. It doesn't look like there's any concerns with the practice reports this week. So that means you're basically locking in like a top 4 snap share for him on the season. And I did think it was pretty bullish that he came back to that 53% share. I was worried he would come back to like a 30 to 40% share, and that is a spot where we've seen him 4 different times this year. So it was very much kind of in the range of what his previous role had been before the breakout. And that 62% share dropped to 40% in week 9 and then back up to 73%. So those 2 games just 1 week apart. They're just 1 week in between, I mean. So, yeah, I think it's pretty exciting. And with Swift, we know he can be really efficient. And that mix of touches that you're talking about, that's been a feature all season. So he's been getting really good high-value touches all year. So, yeah, I really like him this week. He feels like one of those guys who might ultimately end up being kind of popular because he's like someone that everyone's talking about, it seems like, is someone who people aren't going to play. And so I think maybe he will be fairly highly owned. I don't know. I'm just kind of feeling it out still early on, but I'm hoping that he ends up being like that kind of nice contrarian pivot that you can make off of guys that'll be really popular.
Which we're probably going to see some of the other rookies be pretty popular, including Akers and Taylor. It will be interesting between those 3. And you can kind of lump J.K. Dobbins in as well. I mean, Mark Ingram played 1 snap last week, and Jeremy Hill's role, Justice Hill's role, which had been sort of negative for Dobbins in that he was playing on some passing downs. His role decreased, but Baltimore didn't throw a lot in that game against Cleveland last week. They ran a ton. But yeah, Dobbins played a lot more than Edwards, even though Edwards got the 2 TDs and Jackson got 2 touchdowns. Dobbins played quite a bit more, and there's scenarios we could have seen him score 2 to 3 touchdowns. So anyway, you can kind of lump him in, although I think I would take all of Taylor, Akers, and Swift over Dobbins pretty clearly from a ceiling perspective because Dobbins isn't catching a lot of passes. But the rookie running backs are certainly all very interesting plays right now.
Yeah, Dobbins is a little less interesting to me because like what we saw last week was a little bit maybe underappreciated. He got the 11.3 expected points to Edwards 4.8. So like a pretty clear lead there. And then Edwards was just delivering insane efficiency on that workload. That's why he had such a big game. He had 13.5 FPO, which he scored 13.5 fantasy points by just being super efficient. That was not his workload. That was what he did on top of it. Dobbins had 2 points of efficiency, which is like much more reasonable. So you're not going to see that again. Probably you're going to see, maybe Dobbins has a little bit better efficiency, but I don't really see a reason for Dobbins' role to increase dramatically from where it was this past week, where Swift was like pretty close to where Dobbins just was. And we have reason to think that he might jump up, which provides that additional ceiling. So Dobbins feels like a kind of a nice, interesting play. Swift feels like a much higher ceiling play. But I mean, Dobbins.
What about Akers?
Akers is like potentially a smash play, but I think everyone is very much aware of that, being a smash play or looking like a smash play, because he 79% of the snaps last week, 20.4 expected points, 4 green zone carries. I mean, this was a true breakout for him. We talked about last week. The only concern I had was that the routes per snap were still pretty low. And so you do need to be, I think, a little bit conscious of that and understand that if game script gets away from the Rams, that maybe Malcolm Brown does still see quite a few snaps. That is not a concern this week, though. So the Jets just can't put them in that position. So Akers, I think, is set up to roll. There's potentially like Darrell Henderson plays a little bit more if he was a little bit banged up in that game. I don't know, but that seems like maybe a path to failure, but not a particularly likely one. So one thing I think is really interesting about that split is how Darrell Henderson never got the types of route shares that Akers has had the last 2 weeks. And Malcolm Brown never played as few snaps as he's played the last 2 weeks. And we talked about this last week with Akers. Like, the routes were very promising. And Malcolm Brown playing 10% of snaps
the week before last. Yeah. He had played, I think we said on last week's show, he played half of his previous low snap share, I think is the way that I was framing it. And this week it went down further. So like he's played his 2 lowest by a lot over the last 2 weeks. And Akers has had the a way higher routes per drop back than we really saw from Henderson in his best moments earlier this year in like weeks 5, 6, 7, whenever he was really taking over. I think that's around the time. Akers went up over 60% of routes last week, which typically that's been reserved for Brown. So I think that's really optimistic for Akers. But to your point, like some of that might deal with game script. Like he might be running more routes because they're leading. I know you've made that point before as well. But they're going to lead this week. So it does set up very well for Akers. And then Taylor's the other one that it couldn't set up better for him. Houston's run D is really bad. Like they gave up an 80-yard run to David Montgomery last week. So yeah, they're really bad. I think for DFS purposes, like Akers is just on DraftKings very underpriced. So he seems like the harder guy to fade. Like just from a pure, like, let's say you just had all these guys somehow on a roster. It sounds like you're most excited to start Taylor. Yep.
Or would it be okay?
Pretty clearly,
it might be Akers for me.
Yeah. I think you can take the Akers side and you can make a really good case for it. And some of this we're projecting uncertain workloads forward. And so there's like a lot of what we're talking about with these rookies is like stuff that we haven't necessarily seen before. We talked about this last week when we were talking about them and talked about it with Taylor that, he had this upside. We went right through it last week on the show. You compared him to a knockoff Nick Chubb basically and how his efficiency would get there. Cheap. Excuse me. Yeah. And how his efficiency would have to look and how we'd need a long touchdown run for him to get there. And that's what we talked about for a long time. That's what we saw. And it worked out very well. The thing that I like a little more about Taylor is the passing, the receiving side. Like we know that throughout the year, it wasn't necessarily there last week, but throughout the year, he has shown spurts of receiving upside. We know Phillip Rivers is going to throw to the backs a ton. Obviously, Naheem Hines is there, and he's probably more of a threat than Brown is at this point to Akers. But I still like Taylor's team situation better in the sense that I know that he's going to get a couple of targets minimum. I think Akers got no targets last week, right? Like they're going to lead against the Jets. And I think there's scenarios where Akers just doesn't get any targets. And then that's like a little bit thin. You need him to be very efficient on the ground again. And he was last week. And I believe the week before as well, when he had the 60-yard run. But no, he caught 2 balls last week. I lied. But to me feels like a little thinner with Goff, because Goff just like a lot of their offense is based around getting it to the receivers and the tight ends, even in the short area of the field. So like I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I don't think his running back target share is particularly high. Maybe you know that. Rivers is always very high, so I trust that more.
That makes sense. I think like what we saw this past week and actually the week before from Akers, he was in expected points. That's wrote of his stat that weights opportunities by the line of scrimmage. He had 20.2 expected points in week 13 and 20.4 points last week. Jonathan Taylor has never had even close to that. He topped out early in the season at like 16 expected points. Last week he had 15. He's 16.7 in week 2, 15.4 in week 13, 15.1 last week.
A big point about that is that he hasn't been getting the green zone looks, right? And Akers has been getting a ton near the end zone, which is what is going to pop in those expected points models.
Yep.
Akers has had some weeks where he's had a ton. Taylor, after the long run last week, got 8 of the 10 running back touches after that point. He also got a late green zone touch and punched in his second touchdown. That was his second green zone touch of the day, but those were his first 2 green zone touches since week 10. So that was another side of it where like Taylor is starting to take over this backfield, and maybe now he started to wrestle some of that work from Nyheim Hines, who was the only Colts back over the previous 3 weeks, which Taylor did miss one of those 3 weeks with the COVID thing.
Yeah.
But Hines was the only one over the previous 3 from weeks, I guess, 11 to 13 to get any green zone touches at all. He had 2 in each game. He had all 6 of their teams total. And Taylor wrestled 2 away last week. They had 4 total. Hines still got 2. But particularly notable that Taylor kept so much of that work after his long breakout run. It was very similar to Akers 2 weeks ago, which is what we said. Look, hey, Akers had that 61-yard run late in the third quarter for the Rams, and he got every touch for the Rams from that point forward. And we basically predicted that he would kind of be more of a lead the next week, and that's what happened. That it looked a lot like that with Taylor, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be as clear of a split for Taylor with the Colts. They're still going to rotate, but I think his expected points could be higher this week than they've been all year.
That's interesting. Yeah. And to your point, like, you know, there'd been stuff that'd been really frustrating with Taylor. We had a 4th and 1 go to Nyheim Hines 2 weeks ago. We have Jacoby Brissett stealing touchdowns when Taylor missed, but then was also used on a 3rd and 1 once Taylor was back 2 weeks ago. So you have these threats to his short yardage work. So if we're starting to see that maybe they're trusting him more and getting out a little bit in front of that, although not entirely because he's been so efficient on these long runs that everyone's excited to play him. But you're right. Maybe the expected point workload spikes this week, is the highest of the season, and maybe even higher than Akers, because the one thing with Akers is that he had in week 13 7 green zone carries, scored 1 touchdown, and then last week he had 4 green zone carries and did not score any of them. So that is going to spike your expected points, and not in a way that's necessarily predictive.
It's probably not necessarily a great thing, right? To think about from that perspective. There's a lot of carries there. Over the past 2 weeks, he's gotten 11 carries inside the 10-yard line, and he scored 1 touchdown. That's pretty bad, actually.
Right. We saw this with CEH to begin the season, where it's like, oh man, think if he's getting all that goal line work, it doesn't necessarily.
McVay will change things up. Like, he won't keep doing the same thing if it doesn't work. I mean, clearly this argues against it because he's given him 11 carries. He just keeps giving him the ball in close, but it wouldn't be surprising to see them play action, roll out, throw short to Tyler Higbee for 2 touchdowns this week. Yeah, they do stuff like that too. So, to be clear,
Malcolm Brown was in on that Goff sneak. He had the snap on that Goff sneak.
I was just going to say, by the way, I still love Akers as a play. I'm going to play lineups that I'm probably going to play DFS lineups that have. I actually haven't dug into the slate enough, but probably have 3 rookie running backs basically, as long as they all play the same day. I haven't built my Sunday lineups yet, so yeah, they're all on the Sunday slate, right?
Akers,
Swift. Akers, Taylor.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, I want to make lineups that have all 3 of them. But as we're kind of nitpicking I think I would take Taylor over Akers just slightly.
I think I would too. You've convinced me.
Nice.
I definitely see the path to 120 scoreless yards for Akers and maybe catches 2 balls, and it's like, okay. I mean, that's fine. It's not bad, but there's just, I think, Taylor, although I will say Taylor's 15.4 fantasy points over expected were much higher than he's had all year. He'd gone over 5 just once before, which is actually the week 2 weeks ago when he was playing Houston again, as Mike M points out.
That's a great point.
You can go 80 yards. So, yeah, that's interesting. All right. So,
speaking of which, I do want to quickly ask your opinion on David Montgomery, because I think he's a fairly easy fade, but he's going to carry a little bit of ownership even at a higher price, because he's basically, this is the sequence of thing we've talked about before, except for he continues to be good, and we didn't necessarily say he wouldn't because he had the great matchup last week. Except for this week, he did have an 80-yard touchdown run early, still had a normal receiving role that was solid as well. But Cordero Patterson got a little green zone work, and Montgomery otherwise didn't run efficiently at all. He had an 80-yard touchdown run and finished with 120 rushing yards. He had 40 other yards all game. Curious your thoughts on him, if you would play him now that his price is going up, and it seems like he's going to carry some ownership.
Yeah, it seems like, I agree. I think people are going to keep playing him even though the price is going up, because he keeps getting good matchups. And no, I wouldn't be playing. I agree with you. I think he's an easy fade. It's just weird. It's just very strange to think about David Montgomery crushing on low expected points workloads. It's supposed to be the opposite. He's supposed to get a bunch of expected points and not really deliver on them. But you're kind of like, well, his workload is just going to be so strong that I've got to play him through that. But last week was a season low in expected points. He only had 11.5 expected points on the day. He had an 80-yard touchdown. So he got there, but that's just not what we expect from David Montgomery. And it's almost weird where opinions of David Montgomery have almost flipped to where it's like, well, you got to play him in these good matchups because he's going to take advantage of them. But we were so over this dude for so long as a talent, and he has had some nice long runs. I think
basically 2 though. I mean, basically he only has the 2 long runs. The few weeks back in his first good game against Green Bay, he also had a very long run, but he got caught. He didn't even house it. It was I'm looking it up now. It was a 57-yard run. And so over these 3 games where he smashed, he now is averaging 7.4 yards per carry, but I believe almost half of his yards have come on those 2 long runs. So you have this clearly unsustainable 7.4 yards per carry. You also have 4 touchdowns over the last 3 games.
He's getting in the end zone. He's had a couple really nice end zone touchdown runs. Yeah.
And then 2 the whole rest of the season earlier, right? So we have 4 TDs over 3 weeks and 2 over 9 weeks prior. I don't want to bet on that to continue, right? He's not going to be a guy that I expect to score more than 1 touchdown per game on average. He's not that type of clear, this isn't that type of offense.
Yeah, it just feels like a really easy fade if he ends up being popular, because you're right. I don't want pieces of this offense really. When you play Allen Robinson, you're going oh God, please don't bone me. Bears. Montgomery's not a talent that I really want to be all that invested in. He's run hot recently, but we were pretty confident that he wasn't a very talented running back 4 weeks ago. So, yeah, I think it's pretty easy, and it's easy because the workload hasn't been there. He's gone over 20 expected points twice this season, but the last time he did that was week 8. Week 6 was the only other time other than week 8. So, he's losing work around the goal line as well. I mean, within the red zone to Cordero Patterson. I don't know. That's a pretty simple one to me. I hope he ends up being pretty popular because I'm happy to fade him. Greg Smith pointing out we've got some missing cornerbacks here. Minnesota potentially could run up the score. One thing that I've noticed this week, or I just kind of haven't noticed, is people really talking about Minnesota much. The passing game, it was like kind of one of the few weeks where playing a Viking wasn't an awesome move last week. But I'm interested in going back to the Vikings. I mean, it remains a very condensed offense. I also have a note here about Irv Smith potentially being an option with Rudolph potentially missing. But where are you at on the Vikings offense, which has been like one of the best offenses for fantasy all season? But I haven't heard a ton about people playing them this week.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do like how concentrated they are. I think, Cook is such an easy play every week. Just from like for whatever first season. I mean, maybe you're not playing him every week in DFS, but he still feels like an easy play in DFS every week too. He's sort of their whole offense, and there are games where he can be so much of their offense that no one else can really be that productive. We saw a little bit of that last week. And also that they were bad and only scored 14 points. But Irv Smith was the other one that popped. But Smith didn't play as much as Tyler Conklin. He didn't run as many routes, didn't get as many targets as Conklin. He was just very efficient. They still run 2 tight ends, and Conklin is like basically the Rudolph replacement. I don't know that I would expect Irv Smith to have like a massive target share. I do think he's a really good talent, and a clearer disparity in talent between him and Conklin than between him and Rudolph. So maybe that's something that leans a few more targets his way, but their offense doesn't really change. It doesn't mean like more routes for Smith. They're playing a 2 tight end, pretty heavy sort of base offense, frankly. And they're still kind of in that. They're just replacing Rudolph with Conklin. So I don't know that I'm playing a lot of Irv Smith in DFS, just because of a little bit of concern there with like the concentration of the offense. I don't know how much is left for the 2 tight ends, or hasn't been all year, after Cook, Thielen, and Jefferson. Is kind of the way I would frame it.
Yeah, Irv Smith's been targeted on 14% of his routes this year, Conklin on 8%. So I think you're dead on. I think both these guys are going to be out there a lot, and neither of them is all that great at earning targets. I guess Conklin's bad enough at it. Like Rudolph was at 14% as well. So Irv and Rudolph are kind of cannibalizing each other. Conklin, I think, probably not as likely to draw targets as Rudolph. Maybe that boosts Irv up a bit, but I don't think he's necessarily an awesome play, even if Rudolph misses. But
this game's going to suck, isn't it? Like, I feel like this game's going to go under. Chicago at Minnesota. I mean, I don't know. I'm not buying Trubisky as being good now. He was good the last couple of weeks, but really only last week. The week before, a lot of it was really late in the game, kind of garbage timey. I feel like this game's going to go under.
I think it definitely could, but I'm feeling like that's sort of the consensus because people aren't talking about the game. So that's definitely in play, but none of like Jefferson and Thielen don't look like they're going to be chalky. Cook doesn't look like he's going to be that chalky. I mean, he'll be like somewhat chalky because it's Cook, but I don't think he's going to be like a building block for people. So I don't know if you can get the Vikings on the 1 week that people aren't like jamming a Viking. I'm kind of interested in that.
Yeah, that's fair. It's been profitable before. I mean, there's been weeks where people have been on the wrong receiver or not on either of them, and Jefferson and Thielen have shown that ceiling for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about a wide receiver that had a nice week last week, KJ Hamler. I read Stealing Signals, as everyone should, and read your write-up on KJ Hamler. And my question to you, Ben, is how dare you?
I don't even remember what I wrote about him.
You put him in his noise. He was your noise for the game.
But he caught 2 deep balls for touchdowns. That is very noisy. Just doing
that's what KJ Hamler does, Ben. That's why he's in the NFL.
Just doing that one time would have been a great splash week. Doing it twice on 3 targets for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns is very noisy. And then on top of that, Drew Lock, who I was looking at tomorrow's Saturday slate, and I think everyone's going to be on Josh Allen and Rodgers. And then people are going to look at Lock and go, he threw for 4 touchdowns last week. Maybe that's the smart pivot. And I just want to say that Drew Lock sucks. I mean, there's still a very good chance that he could be the top scoring quarterback because there's 4 quarterbacks on the slate. but even at lower ownership, that's not a pivot I'll be making because I don't think he's good. He had this spike week. His 3 weeks prior, he was awful. He threw 7 interceptions over 3 games. He has completed more than 60% of his passes just 3 times all season. This last week was one of them, and it was a season high 78%. He completed like everything. He has 280 passing yards, but 86 of those go to Hamler, right? So it's these 2 deep touchdowns that, deep completion efficiency is going to it's going to boost the efficiency for everyone. We see splash plays. We see that make people look better in their stat lines. Again, he only threw for 280 yards, even though Hamler had the 86. So he was basically around 200 yards, if not for those bomb plays. And I don't expect Hamler to continue to hit on those. Maybe it was a little bit bitterness, though, because I played a Hamler looking for this exact line in DFS lineups. Probably 5 weeks this year I've had him in lineups. There's at least 1 week where I had him in a ton, and he got me like 10 points, but I had him in the min salary punt play that I was using to fill out too many of my DFS lineups, overexposed to, and just praying that he'd have this type of game because it would have just made me so much better across the board. And anyway, he had a decent game that week. Definitely a guy that I've played a lot this year and knew he had this potential, but now that he's done it, it's like, okay, he's done it. Now people are going to be on it.
Now you're out?
Now people are going to be on him in DFS.
Look, Ben, I don't really see what you're seeing here. He had an 8 out of 30, yards per target of 28.7. Like, this is all very sustainable. That's just
yards per target of 28.7.
Pete here with a strong analysis. If you take away Hamler's 2 TDs, he sucked, which is true.
1 target, no catches if you take away the 2 bomb touchdowns.
Yeah, that's important.
Is Drew Lock not good? A hot take?
That's what I'm wondering if this comment is sarcastic, Drew, because Drew Lock isn't good. He's definitely not good. I feel like that's consensus. Anyway. All right, let's move on. I know Ben,
he had the splash game, and people are I'm just warning people about tomorrow. Maybe he plays well again. Who knows? But
get this team a real quarterback, because if you have Cortland Sutton coming back with Jerry Jeudy, who I think has been pretty damn good this year, I've been excited about his role, that they were using him as a deep threat for much of the year. Just the fact that he's been able to do that pretty well is exciting, because my concern with Jeudy was like, okay, so he's just going to be kind of this low ADOT kind of slot rowdy type of guy. Well, if he can mix in deep shots, he could be kind of a Stephon Diggsian type of player. It's pretty exciting to see Jeudy getting used in multiple ways. So if you've got Jeudy, if you got Hamler, and you got Cortland Sutton, and you have a good quarterback, you could be cooking here with Denver. That's pretty exciting. I know you're going to cover this in about 12 hours anyway, but give us a little preview for chasing kickers here. Thoughts on St. Gonzalez?
Oh, there it is, Pete. Yeah, no, that's super funny. I watched your guys' intro on Wednesday. I had to miss a show. I had some early stuff on Thursday morning, but I watched it later, and I got an absolute kick out of it. I know Leone was like joking right after you guys got done with that about if there was a camera on me, what my take would have been. I was laughing my ass off the whole time. It was fantastic. It was fantastic.
When Denny said
so many bad faith arguments about my decisions, though.
All right, do you want to defend yourself here for a second?
Well, I mean, one point you guys made that was really good, I remember, that just pops in my head now, was that if you have a really good team, you probably want to use the spot on a second kicker. And one of the things we talked about when I did that on this roster is we did not have a reliable RB2, and we wanted to take a lot of shots at that spot. We don't feel like we had the upside. This is a team that lost Will Fuller, that lost DJ Moore, didn't get him last week, will get him this week. Has Kyler and Kamara, who are both trending down. So we took some upside shots, and one of those was Jeff Wilson, and we're pretty stoked about him. We might actually play him. And it's always funny. It's like, oh, yeah, so you could roster Matt Breida. Well, no, it was to have more bullets in the chamber, one of which became Jeff Wilson. The last week, I think he was our last ad. So maybe we wouldn't have had Jeff Wilson if we would have taken a second kicker. So you guys can all take that and suck it.
Well, we'll see. I do like that Gonzalez might miss again.
I know, it's great.
The gift that keeps giving. Let's talk about a Cardinal who actually matters, Kenyon Drake, who I thought like we knew that this role sucked and Kenyon Drake had busted, and then all of a sudden he's got this like pretty valuable role. over like a fairly long period of time now. He's been, I think, let me see if I can find my note real quick.
14 green zone touches in the last 3 weeks, which just I didn't have an easy way to look that up, but on a cursory glance, I'm pretty sure is the most for any running back over a 3 consecutive week span all season. And part of that is because even the other guys that have big green zone roles, your team, you can't rely on your team to even get 14 snaps inside the 10-yard line in a 3-week span. Like that's a lot of snaps for any offense. Yeah. A lot of teams, even good offenses, will score from outside the 10-yard line. So that requires certain things. And I think Kyler mixes in here too, interestingly, because they did a jet motion tip pass to Christian Kirk early from like the 4, and he got tackled at the 1. Drake's touchdown later came after a boot action to dump off to Max Williams, where he was stretching for the goal line, and I think his elbow came down about the half-yard line. I think they marked it at like the half-yard line, and then they gave it to Drake. Those are sort of high-variance plays that set up
to even occur. They're high variance to occur. Yeah. Yeah, and the stat I have is that he trails only Dalvin Cook in expected points over the last 5 weeks, which has been driven a lot by getting those green zone touches. So, yeah, that work has really been super valuable. He's still pretty cheap, on DraftKings. He's like 5,500 or something off the top of my head. And in a great matchup here where, the Eagles looked like they had a little bit of life last week, but maybe a little bit of life is even better as long as the Eagles can kind of keep things competitive, but still lose the game. That's sort of a perfect script for Kenyon Drake.
But sorry, you can make your conclusion. What is your?
No, I was going to throw it to you. If how interested are you in him this week?
Almost none. I think he's like the easiest fade of all time, which seems sort of ludicrous when a guy got 14 touches so close to the end zone in the last couple of weeks. But I look at this as I'm going to play Kyler in DFS stacks this week. So first of all, with Drake, Chase Edmonds has 5 green zone touches all season long. Drake's had this role all along. But again, to the point where they've just had more snaps inside the 10 in the last few weeks, even in games where they've done well, he had never had more than 3 in a game all season. And again, Chase Edmonds has 5 all year. No other Arizona back has 1. Like it's been Drake that's gotten all these touches all year long. He's never had more than 3 in a game. And in the last 3 weeks, 3's his low. He's had a 4 and a 7 as far as his green zone touches over the last 3 weeks. I would expect this week and in any given week that he's more around the 2 to 3 green zone touch mark that he's been at in the much larger sample. On top of that, we just talked about how when players are inefficient, you can look at the volume and see that it's popping and maybe not account for the fact that, number one, some of that's due to their own efficiency. Number two, the team could do different things. And they did do some different things. I talked about the jet motion tip pass to Christian Kirk. The weeks before, they were just giving it to Drake every time. They also did the rollout pass to Max Williams. What I saw in this game when I was watching it was Kyler Murray was very close to a big ceiling game. He missed both of those potential passing touchdowns. The one was a tip pass, but it was different play calls closer to the goal line. He missed 2 potential passing touchdowns on tackled at the 1 plays. They also got stuffed at the 1 on the first drive, and they threw in that scenario on 4th and goal. So they did call another pass play and close. It didn't work. So same argument could be applied to him that, okay, maybe the passing game close isn't working either, but they were trying it more. And then number 2, the Giants never even competed in this game. And so you had Cliff Kingsbury doing his typical thing where he just settled for so many. They kicked 4 field goals. They won 26-7 very easily. Daniel Jones was a shell of himself, which isn't even, a very good self to begin with as far as his upside as a player. I'm sure he's a great human being. Sorry, that was kind of an awful way of putting it. But I thought Kyler threw better. He nearly threw 1 pick. He took a bad sack, but I thought he threw better. He was rushing with more intent. He ran 13 times. He's only run 5 times in each of the previous 3 games. And it looked like he was looking to run more in watching him. So I thought this was one of his better games recently. And I thought it was like the lower end of the potential outcomes, basically. He had 1 touchdown passing, none rushing. Typically when he's playing like this, he has multiple TDs. And like I said, he's close to that. and he only threw for 244 yards because the game wasn't competitive at all. And I don't know if Philly will be, but they look better with Hurts, right? Like, I feel like this game has some potential to be a little bit more competitive.
I like that take. It's an interesting take. If you're playing Kyler, then how are you stacking him up? One of the reasons I ask is that shout out to Sam Hoppin, who has this new site, fantasyevaluator.com. He's got this player correlation tool there. And one of the things that jumped out to me is that Kyler highly correlated with Christian Kirk, less so with really anyone else on the team, and most notably DeAndre Hopkins, not quite as correlated. And it just sort of goes to what we kind of already know, right? DeAndre Hopkins kind of gets his, almost regardless of whether Kyler goes off. But when Kyler goes off, it tends to be Kirk that comes along for the ride, and a lot of other times Kirk does not really do that much. So does Kirk, if you're playing Kyler, are you eyeing Kirk? Are you thinking double stack with Kirk and Hopkins? How do you think the best way to play Kyler?
I wasn't eyeing Kirk. I was thinking just Kyler and Hopkins as sort of the easy answer, but that correlation point makes so much sense. When we've seen Kyler's ceiling as a passer, those are the games where Kirk's had the splash plays, right? The downfield touchdown against Dallas. He basically had the KJ Hamler stat line that week. He had 2 TDs on 3 targets. He had a 123-yard game against Miami, and I think that was one of Kyler's other big games. So yeah, that makes sense. Like when Kirk is popping a little bit, scoring some touchdowns as well, like he was earlier in the year, and he hasn't scored now for 5 straight weeks. That's been better for Kyler's passing numbers, and then Kyler's rushing numbers have kind of always been stable. So that's been the ceiling for Kyler, except for recently, obviously. But yeah, the concern with Kirk is like he just hasn't been very good recently. Like I was very optimistic about him coming in the year. He hasn't been very good, and some of the Kyler ceiling can also just be on the rushing side. He can have 100 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns rushing. I still think that's very possible. Just because he hasn't done that in a month doesn't mean it's not there. And so there are scenarios, even though that correlates so strongly, like you're talking about, there are scenarios where we get an outcome that we haven't really seen yet, which is Kyler really peaking on the rushing side, throwing for 250 and 2, and the bulk of that going to Hopkins, like it does usually when he throws for 250 and 2, right?
Yeah. I think if you're playing Kirk, and you probably are including Hopkins with like Kyler double stacks, but maybe you have the guts to do a Kirk single. I don't know. If you are, though, I think then you need to like consider it a game that Philly is pushing, where you do want to find some way. Maybe it's Miles Sanders or it's tough because they're just such unappealing bringbacks. I guess Goddard would be like
would probably be the option, yeah.
But that's probably what you need to do if you're going to throw in Kirk, because you need something to push Arizona to where Kyler's actually popping off. But yeah, he can get there with rushing, and then Hopkins just doing his normal Hopkins thing. So
yeah, I mean, and Goddard could have, a couple 20-yard receptions that make some quick, like the way that plays out, that makes some quick Eagles drives. He certainly has that downfield potential as a tight end. He's also not one of my favorite tight end plays this week, similar to how Kirk's not one of my favorite receiver plays. You make a good point. This is a tough one to stack. I'm excited to play Kyler, but it is hard to navigate how to do that.
Well, but it's interesting, right? When we think about the correlation stuff, it's like the reason I think that Kyler and Hopkins aren't as correlated as you might think is because Kyler feeds Hopkins, but then Kyler gets there usually through his legs. So Hopkins' day as a receiver has nothing to do with how much Kyler's running. You know what I mean? Those are fairly uncorrelated things. I mean, there's some correlation and helps the offense move. If he's just not running, maybe they're just not as effective overall. But for the most part, it's like, Kyler's feeding Hopkins. That might not be enough for him to have the big games. But I think that's kind of why I see that.
That makes a good point. Yeah. I mean, because it goes both ways. You can also, you can certainly say it's uncorrelated. It's good when the offense is moving for both of them. That's like a positive note. Even if Kyler's running, it increases the potential for Hopkins to score on that drive or whatever. But then anytime he's running, it might be a case that he couldn't find Hopkins down the field, and so he took off and ran, right? So it goes both ways, and there's not really a strong pull.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting little correlation, two-player correlation that we probably spent so much time on. But let's talk about Goddard. Like the thing that Goddard it just drives me nuts is that like when you look at Goddard this season, he's been awesome. And this if you look at stuff like yards per route run, he's not necessarily maybe going to jump out as huge because he's on the Eagles, but he has a 1.63 yards per route run, which is the best on the team among guys who really have played any amount of real routes. And he's now seen his routes decline as Zach Ertz has come back. And, just kind of classic Eagles stuff where they're kind of screwing over their best playmakers. He was at least at 71% last week in terms of routes run per dropback, 68 the week before, but he was up at 96% in week 12. So a very significant drop off. And because of that, I do agree that he's not one of my favorite plays. I think if the Eagles were smarter, Goddard would be in a really nice spot here, just as like one of the few tight ends who's going to potentially run up above 90% of routes on his team. But that's not really in play anymore with Ertz back.
What do you think about Hurts? Because he was good. He looked good throwing the ball, but his final passing line wasn't amazing. 17 for 30, 167 and a TD. I mean, that's like a rookie quarterback making his first start. Really, where he got there was he rushed 18 times for 106 yards on the ground. I mean, he took off and ran a lot. And we know that he has that ability. But if he's going to be a guy who runs for 80 yards, I don't think you can expect any quarterback to run for 100 yards, first of all, pretty much ever. I just talked about Kyler having that upside, and I think Hurts has that upside. But a lot of times, even these types of quarterbacks, they might only run for 30 or 40 yards, right? And so if he does that, then the question is, does he have 250, 300-yard passing upside?
I probably not. 300-yard passing upside, probably not. But, he's still pretty cheap on DraftKings. He's 5,900. I think he'll be a lot more popular this week than he was last week, but I don't know that he's going to be like mega popular. And the biggest thing like with how you play him is that there's just no full-time players on his team. So you can't really stack him.
So I'm thinking about it from a seasonal perspective, but then I'm also thinking about it from a DFS perspective with the bringbacks. This is a team that we know is rotating a lot of pass catchers. And if you don't think they have 300 passing yardage upside, it's really hard to play like Goddard because nobody on their team is really approaching a 30% target share, right? Even if Goddard is our favorite Eagles play, we're hoping for maybe 25% in a best case scenario, but in an offense that maybe only throws for 220 yards, that's not really that, like, still pretty thin as far as upside goes.
Yeah, I think the closest you can get to like a stack with Hurts in my mind is going like Hurts, Hopkins, Drake, and try to get like the full touchdowns for Arizona through Drake taking the rushing stuff. So kind of countering to the point you were making before, like maybe things do stay the same way. Drake still gets that really high value stuff around the goal line. He gets there on that. Hopkins just kind of does his thing, as we talked about, not all that highly correlated to Kyler. Kyler doesn't have a big running day, but Hurts does. And you can kind of do that. That would be the only way that I would really want to have like Hurts plus two pieces from that game, because I'm not playing Rager. I mean, he led all skill players last week with Greg Ward led all skill players last week with 76% routes run per dropback, and then Rager and Goddard tied at 71%. That's just not enough routes for wide receivers. We talked about Goddard it being a problem. It's a bigger problem for the wide receivers, I think, just like because you have a lot of other options at the wide receiver position that run 90+% of routes. Like that's just too much to be giving up. There's too many snaps for those guys to be missing. I can't stomach it. I don't think they're very good plays. And
what do you think Hurts's floor is? Like, so this is actually a seasonal question that I'm probably going to start Hurts in a semifinal for my longest running league, right? It's a home league, but I've had it forever. 22 years or something. We started in 1999. And that's the league I've mentioned on the show before. I had Dak, We did an auction. I bought Dak fairly cheap. Breaks his leg. Traded for Burrow because I had a ton of depth. I took like a middle of the road approach in an auction. So I traded for a QB, which I don't usually do, and then he gets hurt. So now I'm looking at like sort of scrubs, bottom of the barrel guys. What do you think his floor is? Do you feel comfortable playing him in seasonal?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do. Yeah, I mean, because the rushing gives you some floor. He's not going to flip. He's going to throw for some yards. They actually do have talented guys there. I mean, I think the bigger problem is for DFS because he'll probably hit Rager on like one, decently long pass. He's got Goddard will be on the field enough for it to help Ertz somewhat. You're going to have Ertz coming in. Who knows? Maybe Ertz can have a little bit of production. He's not totally dust, but it's more like any one of those skill position players isn't going to be out there enough to accumulate a big day. But combined, they should be able to facilitate at least some passing yardage, and you get the rushing floor. So right. I feel pretty comfortable with him in season long. I don't know like what your other option would be, but I would rather.
I mean, I have like Trubisky and Bridgewater and these dudes. So
I'd much rather play him over those guys.
Yeah, Tua's one that I just added as well, actually. But I can't play him against New England. But I'm gonna see. If I win and get through, I might be playing Tua in Week 16 if his pass volume stays high because he's been kind of interesting the last couple of weeks too.
PMAR says he's pretty similar to Tanner Hill this week, which I agree with. Yeah,
Tanner Hill.
Tanner Hill.
Taysom Hill's brother.
I don't know if that's a typo or just what you call him, but I kind of like it. Tanner Hill. Let's talk about this question here. Sit one, Deontay, Godwin, or Cam Akers. I'm hoping your answer is Deontay so we can transition to that, which is a pre-pick topic. But what was your actual answer to that?
It's Godwin or Deontay. I'm definitely playing Akers.
I agree. I think Akers is locked in there.
Godwin is playing Atlanta. I was checking if he's playing. I didn't even have it on top of my head. We're running on fumes. It's December 18th. Yeah, I think I'd play Godwin, but I thought it was. So let's transition to that. I thought it was promising that after Deontay sucked and got benched, they brought it back in the second half when they needed to throw. Like they think he's one of their best receivers. He still runs routes on 58% of dropbacks, even though he got benched. Like he still seems to be someone they want to feed. He had drops issues before this week, and they started him, and we're throwing to him right away. Like they want him to be a key part of their offense. They've been throwing to him at a crazy high rate all year. I think he gets another opportunity this week to basically be a full-time player as long as he doesn't start dropping the ball again. There's risk. If he drops the ball, he's probably going to get benched again. But if he doesn't, I think he has just as much upside as ever that he ever did in terms of routes, which then means he has the same upside in terms of targets, in my opinion.
Yeah. Where are you at on like the Deontay isn't good, is good debate?
I've always thought drops are a stupid stat. They're a volume stat. Guys who drop a ton of passes see a ton of targets. And we talk a lot about how earning targets are a skill. Targets per route run is a skill stat. It's an importance. It's probably my favorite receiver stat. And he does very well in that stat. He's
absurd in that.
Yeah. Earns targets at a very high rate. That is a positive sign. That is a more important positive sign than drop rate, which is not correlated well year over year compared to targets per route run. And again, it's typically a volume stat. There are so many guys who have had drops issues in the NFL, and you can visualize how many points they've left on the field, but they're still very productive for fantasy. And I think fantasy managers get that really mixed up. They get frustrated because there was potential points that were missed, but they don't understand that that's not actually a significant, like even with Deontay dropping a ton of passes, what's he at? Like, he's at a really high number. He's at like double-digit drops. Most guys are in like single digits. The difference between a high drop season and a low drop season is usually like 8 drops, and then somebody has 2 drops. And we say, oh my God, he only has 2 drops all year. And it's like, okay, there's 6 plays there for the whole year that we're putting a lot of weight on. And then the flip side is Deontay's really high targets per route run is generating a lot more than 6 potential opportunities, right? Or 6 or 8 potential opportunities. He's seeing so many more targets than a lot of other players in the league, frankly. Like you said, he's dominating in that targets per route run stat. So Whether he's good, whether he's bad, I don't know that necessarily matters. Obviously, he has an issue catching the football, which isn't great for a receiver. From like a fan of the NFL standpoint, I would say he's probably not that good. He's not amazing because he does really seem to struggle with concentration. But from a fantasy football perspective, I would say that doesn't matter as much as how many targets he earns, and he is good. Does that make sense?
Yeah. PMAR is getting a little bit frisky in the chat here. Name a better second-year wide receiver than Deontay or McLaurin. DK Metcalf, PMAR. What are you talking about?
And also AJ Brown.
And AJ Brown. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. But I think that maybe this is probably trade deadlines have passed in dynasty leagues and stuff, but if you're in a weird dynasty league that you can still trade in it. And there are some
we had the mic issue. Now we got the camera going all over the room.
Down. Yeah. I've got drop issues. So God, what's going on with this thing? Anyway,
we got the Blair Witch Project over here.
If you are, DJ here getting in a point before I can make mine. You aren't factoring in the consequences of drops. He was benched last game. Wouldn't have come back in if the Steelers' offense didn't suck. But isn't that the point? The Steelers' offense sucked without him. He gets open. He gets targets.
Again, that was the one highest profile example I can think of in the last probably decade of a guy having drops issues and getting benched in season. It being so bad that he got benched.
I can think of another example.
Who?
Little healthy scratch last week, Leonard Fournette.
Okay, whatever. That's not a guy I'm considering a drops scenario, but maybe. Eric Ebron's drops, I think, years ago with the Lions impacted him a little bit. He was still playing is the thing. But like Terrell Owens had drops issues. We just talked about AJ Brown. He's had some high profile drops this year. Will Fuller, that was always talked about. Will Fuller still always played constantly. Like this is an example of one of the highest profile scenarios of a guy getting benched. And then he still came back in and ran routes on 58% of the dropbacks. Because the team wanted to make a point, but they also weren't going to force themselves to lose. They think he's one of their better players. That's I don't think I am not factoring the consequences of drops. I think I actually am very fairly factoring it in that there doesn't really actually seem to be consequences of drops, frankly.
Yeah, or that the consequences have come and gone.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't expect it necessarily.
It's a real low probability for that to actually cost somebody, like for Deontay to get benched for an extended period of time. And what I'm saying is because of that trend, I think Deontay is going to get a start and a chance to run a full slate of routes this week. Maybe I'm completely off on that, but I think they're going to go right back to him and be like, yeah, we trust him. We're going to give him a chance. And all he has to do is catch the ball, which, again, drops are even when you have a high drop rate, it's a very small percentage of your overall targets. As long as he doesn't string a few drops together, he's probably not going to have that happen again.
I agree. And I'll also say that, when he was benched, you did not see Chase Claypool seeing a lot of those routes. It was James Washington, which I think is good news for Deontay Johnson because I think Chase Claypool is a future stud. I don't think that James Washington is a stud. And so, if Claypool had gotten a chance to shine and had shown, then maybe Deontay Johnson has a harder time getting his routes back. But I think James Washington gives his routes right back up to Deontay Johnson. And we do see Deontay Johnson out there for, kind of the normal role that he had prior to week 14. I think I'm with you. I would bench Chris Godwin, not Deontay Johnson.
Well, Godwin's in a good spot too. It is a tough call, but and maybe there's enough risk with Deontay that I'd play it safe with Godwin. It's one I'd probably want to dig into a little bit more, but I do feel like Deontay has more upside than Godwin right now, just on a given week. He's had that sort of all year, right? Like he's had this really high target upside. And again, it wasn't even the first drop that got him benched last week. It was like multiple real bad drops. Like it was pretty awful situation where Tomlin had no choice, essentially. Like it's such a small percentage outcome for a guy to get benched like that, and then even still he came back, like we said. But yeah, I'm carrying on now on this.
Well,
point.
The chat really wants us to say we're benching Deontay Johnson because we got another one. Bench Robert Woods, Brandon Ayuk, Deontay Johnson, T.Y. Hilton, and we wanted to talk about Ayuk.
Yeah,
there's been
Ayuk's the best option there. I think he's in such a good spot. against Dallas, and he's been so good over his last 5 games. I think his minimum is like 5 catches, 75 yards. He scored 3 touchdowns over that stretch. Those are his minimums. Every single week he's had at least, I think it was, I wrote in Signals, at least 14 PPR points just on catches and yards. Like he's very consistently caught passes and gained yards in a way that is just not being talked about. And I guess it is a little bit more now, but he's done it with Debo in and out of the lineup. He's played 2 games in that 5-game stretch now, I think, without Debo. Or is it 3 if you count the injury game? I don't know. But he's done well with Debo out of the lineup. He's good. He's really good. Yeah.
Yeah, you lock Ayuk in. I think he's just a no-brainer. I think Woods is also in a really nice spot. You know, we've got wide receivers have feasted against the Jets. The Jets are terrible. So probably this one comes down to Hilton and Deontay Johnson. We talked Deontay Johnson, but we wanted to talk about Hilton anyway. Where are you at on him? Bunch of questions about him earlier in the chat. You know, like all the narratives, all the, going against Houston. So what do you think about Hilton?
The Houston thing I've tried to deny in the past, and it's real hard to deny how good he is against Houston. I think it probably has more to do with the fact that he's typically a lot better on turf than on grass, and the matchups have just been good against Houston over the years. But he had his best game of the year against Houston this year, and he's had some of his all-time best games of his entire career. Like almost all of them have come against Houston. I just pulled up his game log. His first, second, and fourth highest receiving yardage totals of his career have all come against Houston. He's had so many splash games against them over the year. He's had another 1, 2, 3, 4, 500-yard games against them, so 8 total. And they play twice a year. It's not like he's played them 50 times. Like it's like just about every time he plays Houston, he does well. Whatever the cause of that, I do think the other promising part of it is that he's playing really well right now. He also played well against the Raiders, right? And he's actually seeing some air yards. He wasn't seeing air yards earlier in the year. It was like he was old and didn't have that part of his game anymore, but he's playing with a new QB this year, and they've started to hit down the field now. So he had a long touchdown pass on a deep shot last week, and his air yards have been a lot more stable over the last 3 to 4 weeks than they were for the first 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever it is now. But I'm a little bit more optimistic in Hilton. I don't think I would sit Deontay for Hilton.
Yeah, I think Hilton's the sit. Mike's not convinced by the Houston narrative, but I do think I'm the narrative that is more important is that Hilton has really come on of late, to the second part of your point, and that is important. But his whopper over the season is still not as high as Deontay Johnson's, and I guess this could be. I don't know. I just have a hard time playing Hilton. I'll be honest. I have a really.
I think you should. We should have a hard time playing any Colt. A couple of weeks ago, I was saying that it was way too balanced for the entire Colts offense, and particularly their pass catchers. I mean, I think the running backs are balanced as well, but there are reasons to like the split workload in an offense that throws to the backs a lot, has a really high rate of high value touches overall. You can still get there, and now Taylor's really trending up. But a couple weeks ago, I was saying that, and I was saying the only guy that really looked like he had a shot to be the true number 1 was Michael Pittman as of just I think 2 weeks ago. And then Hilton has had 2 strong weeks. And the week before that, he was good from a production standpoint, but only had the 5 targets. Really, the last 2 weeks are the ones where the volume has been strong. And it wouldn't be that surprising to see him go back to sort of a 5 to 7 target range, which he actually was only at 7 targets last week, because they spread the ball around so much, right? And they don't necessarily need to pass. This could be a very run-heavy game against Houston. It wouldn't be surprising to see Taylor have 20 carries in this game. So, I'm optimistic on Hilton from a starting point very similar to yours, which was, and we always I always think we don't talk about expectation enough, but my expectation for Hilton has been very low, like yours. I'm a little bit optimistic now based like relative to that. But if you were high on Hilton, then you were probably, you've been right the last couple of weeks, but don't take my optimism as a reason to push him into like the top 10 receivers, I think.
Yeah. Pittman has been seeing more snaps, to stay Cruel's point here. I think it just, to me though, it seems like one of those things where they just keep giving Pittman more routes and trying to make him the guy, and Rivers is just not having it. Hilton gets targeted at a really high rate, but yeah, with as much as they could rush, I just have a hard time getting on board with it. We have a question here from Mike. Did I miss the Fournette talk? I did just kind of talk about how he got benched for drops, but we have not talked about how he's probably going to be DFS chalk this week. I haven't brought myself to that point. Well, if Rojo's out.
Oh, God, is he going to be chalk?
I think he's going to be pretty chalky. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I just won't play him. Like, he's 4,500 on DraftKings. He would have to be 500 before I would seriously consider playing Leonard Fournette coming off of a healthy scratch. Like, to me, you talked about Drake being one of the easiest fades. This is truly the easiest fade of my lifetime. I just have no interest. Yeah, he's going to be pretty chalky according to that.
Wow, he's projecting over 20% ownership. I get that he's cheap, but and I guess I see the logic. He's probably the best bet for a lot of early down carries, but I don't know how you go from healthy scratch to chalk. That just is that's an aggressive.
Leone turning into Leone is like, I'm so nervous because I'm sure you guys know, but
He's
Leone
4,500. Leone, learn how to read.
Yeah, Leone, you're competing for 2.5 million. Get your shit together, dude. You got to know the salaries. If Leone wins this friggin' DraftKings tournament with Leonard Fournette, I'm gonna be so mad. I'm gonna be so mad.
This show is so biased. Oh God, look at him.
I can't deal with it. Why wouldn't Fournette take the role that Rojo chalk had at 6,100?
What?
He's saying that basically Fournette's the same play that Rojo was. I mean, yeah, I guess, but like you're first of all, they just had him as a healthy scratch, so the paths to failure there are quite evident. They mix in Vaughn. They continue using LaShawn McCoy in the pass down role. But you know what, Mike? Like, this is why, because this show is so biased. That's my real answer. I'm not giving you a rational response. Play Leonard Fournette if you want to.
No, the rational response is they essentially don't trust him at this point. They do mix in the other guys, and they throw him more in this spot against Atlanta, which wouldn't be that surprising. He is a big favorite, but they're on the road. I mean, you have to get rushing efficiency. And the deal with Fournette is the same as it's always been. He's not an efficient runner, but he does have whatever breakaway speed. He does have big play ability.
He does not have breakaway speed. He is so slow. He is so big that he literally the only way he ever breaks tackles is that the guys think he's going to move like a train and he moves like a truck instead. And he's like slightly faster.
I had this college buddy that was a big Falcons fan that with Michael Turner, whenever he would run, he'd go, "I'm not as fast as you think I am," because guys would always over pursue. So that's like exactly what you're describing.
Yeah, exactly. That's how he breaks tackles. And the other way is that he literally he's like a heat-seeking missile. Like he finds defenders to plow into when he has open field in front of him.
But he has some long runs in his career. It's not like we can't deny that he could David Montgomery, but it would not be surprising for Leonard Fournette to not run as many routes as he used to be because they seem to give that up a little bit. And then, like, Leone, why? Why are we nuts if you don't know if he's good or bad chalk? Like he
take a chance, Leone. Like, what is he? You're just like
you don't know if he's good or bad, but he should be chalk. Is that what you're saying?
You need to say he's good chalk if you want to come at us. You can't just you guys are nuts. Nuts for
what?
Doesn't
even make any sense.
Big, fat, slow, and likes to run into people. That's just common sense. Thank you, Lewis Hugh Jones breakaway.
Okay. He had. It's an official stat that he has posted really high, miles per hour on his long runs. Like that's a real thing that's happened. I don't want to like pretend like I'm weighing that a lot. It is a real thing that's happened.
I need proof. Show me Leonard Fournette's miles per hour. I'll be surprised if it's a plural miles per hour.
I'm still putting it out there that like that only happens when he gets loose and he gets these long runs, which again he's done in his career. But otherwise, this dude averages like 3.5 yards. Like even with long runs throughout his career, he's a career 3.9 yards per carry guy. This guy is not a very good runner. Like he does just run into people. Yeah, I do want you to ban Leone. That's good.
Yeah, well, Leone goes. Now Leone is all belligerent in the chat. All
right, let's leave these clowns to have their argument.
You looked at the slate. He's 4,500 with super high team total and a favorite to take the early down work. Great,
but you don't know if he's good or bad, Sean, so you can't speak to it.
Great, you little Leone. Beep boop, 4,500. The fucking computer.
He loves his projections. The guy has upside.
You can't just like math it in, dude. Lenny sucks.
I'll just say he's got upside, but he also has plenty of paths to not being one of the 3 running backs you want or 2 running backs you want, depending on the winning builds. I mean, like, sure, you can play him in cash if you want, but he could also kill your cash lineup. Like, I see the logic for him being chalk because he's cheap, but. Whew.
I won't be.
What else do we got to talk about? Let's get off Leonard Fournette.
Let's get off. Let's move on.
Jeff Wilson. What do you think about Jeff Wilson? Because we're thinking about playing him in that high stakes league. And you asked me this. He's seen a lot of work the last 2 weeks. Startable even if Mostert goes. So I'm actually going to ask you the question that you wrote. Is he startable if Raheem Mostert goes?
It's pretty thin, but he's seeing a lot of work, and Mostert has he's been the more valuable of the two in terms of the workload. In expected points over the last 2 weeks, he's been running back 9. So it's more that like, man, if Mostert is like limited and kind of like not expected to have like his full work, then I do think maybe he's a bit sneaky, and I would assume he would come in extremely low owned at with that type of, because no one wants to play Jeff Wilson if Mostert goes. That it is a little thin, but if like it looks like he's going to be truly unowned, and Mostert isn't expected to be fully healthy, I'm still a little interested. Leone can't believe it.
God, look, put up his other one, because the guy so badly wants to be part of the show. You came here for professionalism? Is that what you came here for? This is an insult. I'm sorry that I'm faking professionalism.
But I guess talk me up, because clearly I'm on unstable ground here with this Jeff Wilson thing. But like he has had a really substantial role over the last 2 weeks. And this is, an offense where we've seen running backs kind of come out of nowhere and have really valuable roles. And the thing I like about Jeff Wilson is that the one thing we know about Jeff Wilson is that he gets used to the goal line. That's like the thing we can count on with Jeff Wilson. Previously, we were like, well, Jeff Wilson's not interesting because that's all he does. But this past week, he ran a route on 41% of dropbacks. He ran a route on 51% of his snaps. That's pretty interesting to me. He was out, like, when Jeff Wilson was on the field, the thing he did the most last week was run a route. He ran a route on 41% of dropbacks in week 14. So that's the same week. In week 13, he ran a route on 64% of his snaps, 46% of dropbacks. So for 2 straight weeks, he's been running more routes, than getting carries. So he's been out there a lot more than you would expect from a guy that our previous perception of him was like he's kind of this goal line only type of dude. And so that, I think it's worth pointing out that we need to at least update kind of our perception of Jeff Wilson and what his role is in the offense.
Right. And McKinnon hasn't played, really. And there's not I don't think any significant reason for that. He played 2 snaps in week 13, then played none and was active. He played some special teams last week. And McKinnon, frankly, hasn't been very good this year. But the big case for Wilson is you want San Francisco running backs. You want Kyle Shanahan running backs. That's been true for a lot of years. It was true earlier this year when Jeff Wilson, after an in-game injury, got into a 17-carry, 2-target workload and went for over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Patriots, and then he got hurt. I mean, that was like at halftime. He didn't even play that full game.
Yep. He was smashing in that game.
He was absolutely destroying. He's been pretty efficient in this offense. It's not too dissimilar from like a J.K. Dobbins type play where you're not really expecting the absolute full workload. You have to bank on some efficiency, but we do have to acknowledge situations where efficiency can be there. And this is a situation where I think it can. Dallas isn't good. Their run D is actually very bad. Like they've been gashed by a lot of guys this year. Antonio Gibson's coming to mind on Thanksgiving, crushing them in the second half for some long touchdowns. I know both of Gibson's 100-yard games have come against Dallas, but Dallas has given up some other, season highs throughout this year as well. So it would not be all that surprising to see Jeff Wilson, if Mostert's not 100%, rush 15 times and go for 90 yards and a couple of touchdowns like that. But that's what you're banking on. It's the rushing efficiency, and it's a little bit tough to trust, obviously.
Yeah, and a report actually came out right before we went on that Mostert does not have an injury designation for this Sunday's game. So, yeah, he's now kind of limited Wilson to like pretty big GPP stuff.
But they're going to lead, and the Niners with Nick Mullins and all that, like they're going to lead in a way where they're going to get 30 running back touches.
Right.
Like, I'm still considering Wilson in season long in that scenario. So,
I'm with you. I think that.
I mean, Baltimore a couple weeks ago, Gus Edwards 7 carries, 101 yards. J.K. Dobbins 11 for 71 and a TD, and Lamar Jackson 13 for 94 and a TD. Obviously, this is Baltimore, but they ran for 200. What did they run for? 294 yards against them 2 weeks ago. Last week, the Bengals were out of it early, but because they fumbled 3 times early in the game. But that game, Baltimore smashed them. The game before that, Washington game, Dallas gave up 182 rushing yards, and that's the game on Thanksgiving where Gibson went wild. Game before that, they gave up 125 rushing yards, and I'm sure Dalvin Cook had a big game that game because that was against the Vikings. This is a team that running backs have been crushing.
Yep. And 5 targets in week 13, 3 targets last week. He's getting used in a way we don't expect from Jeff Wilson, and part of it's because, like you said, McKinnon's out of the rotation. So
I think I'm going to play him.
Are you going to play him in season long?
In the main event, yeah. I think I'm going to – remember I was talking about he was one of the guys that I didn't use the second kicker on, and I kind of have to play him now to get something out of that spot. Like I need him to have a monster game, and then I can justify only carrying 1 kicker.
I love this double down. And I also like that Leone is anti-Jeff Wilson after being pro kicker. So it kind of keeps you in the same battle, which is important. Yeah.
Are we scared of Mostert? Like, yeah, I mean, yeah, he's their lead back. He's the one that they're going to generate more touches for. But again, the last 2 weeks has been a 2-man committee, and it's a valuable rushing offense. So, like, you can get there.
It works out. It's Mostert is Tevin Coleman, and Jeff Wilson is like Devonta Freeman from the old Shanahan Atlanta days. Like, that's the kind of the comp that you're basically hoping for. I don't know. It's not. Maybe that's not how it plays out, but that's sort of the play, is that you're like, I'm taking the guy who's going to get more of the goal line work probably. Actually, both of them get used in the receiving game this year, and they could both have pretty solid games because that's what they are. They're committee backs. If they're, now that they're both going, I think we're talking about guys who should have both between 10 and like 16 expected points in the game.
Yep. That's a good way of putting it. How else can we piss off Leone, who's still just like trying to take this so seriously?
I do think without Jeff Wilson, now Fournette's going to be like potentially up to 30% ownership and shit. Like, it's just disgusting. Let's talk about some actual interesting running backs. Miles Sanders,
Ito Smith, Travion Williams, Jalen Samuels.
No. Let's talk about Miles Sanders, because he jumped up to 80+% of the snaps last week, kind of unexpectedly. He had been in this like 65-35 to 60-40 split with Boston Scott for weeks. And, the the more popular narrative this week is like about Jalen Hurts opening up lanes as a rushing quarterback, and there's something to that. But hey, I mean, snaps are the things that matter the most for running backs. To see him up at 80% was huge. That helped, explain what we saw, I think, more than Jalen Hurts, or as much. But is that stable? Are we going to get that 80% snap count again?
I hope so. I mean, one of the ways I would put the Jalen Hurts switch is it could have influenced the snaps. They could have felt like Sanders is their more trustworthy back, and they wanted to have him on the field in the huddle, whatever, in the backfield with Hurts picking up blitzes, whatever their logic could be. It could have been tied to the quarterback. I mean, we saw when Taysom Hill took over with the Saints, and I'm not saying that the Saints trust Latavius Murray more, but that was the package we started to see more of. We started to see more of Latavius Murray tied to Taysom Hill in the backfield. And for whatever reason, the Eagles might have tied Sanders to Hurts. It did seem out of nowhere that he played 81% of the snaps. That was the second highest rate of the year. But early in the year, he was playing over 75% at least, quite a bit. And then, like you said, since he's come back, he hasn't hit that at once. And now he does this week. They win. He's been very efficient as a runner. It's tough to trust that those big runs. He's got some of the longest runs of the year, a few different weeks. He did it against Pittsburgh a while back. Did it against Baltimore, I think, had a long run. And then this week against the Saints, against some tough matchups. But you can't really bank on that for DFS. But I do think he's interesting when you go back to the concept of how to stack this game or whatever. If you do want to play Kyler, I probably would bring it back with Sanders, frankly.
I think so too.
You can get this potential workhorse, and you maybe can get some rushing efficiency because he's shown clearly that all the big runs haven't been, totally fluky. At some point you trust efficiency too,
Yeah, and I would also point out that we saw just a 4% difference between Boston Scott snaps from week 13 to week 14. Boston Scott only played 26% of the snaps in week 13, down to 22% week 14. It was Jordan Howard's role that changed. Jordan Howard, I believe, was a healthy scratch, did not get a snap in week 14, but had stolen a disgusting 18% of the snaps the week before. Corey Clement played 2 snaps or something in week 14, so he was the running back 3. That's an important change, and one that I don't think we're going to see shift going forward. That was stupid to play Howard that much. They stopped doing it. I just have a hard time imagining them going, let's try that again after Sanders did what he did last week. So
the offense looked so much better last week. You have to expect they would do the same thing.
You would. And there's 2 weeks sample now of Boston Scott's role being reduced. So that makes me feel a little bit more confident in it. It's not just 1 week. Actually, let's see. I think, it's just 2 weeks, of Boston Scott snaps going down. But because they were 40% in week 12. So it's not just a 1 week sample, at least. Obviously, it's still a little bit up in the air. It hasn't been locked in, but I agree. If I'm bringing back an Eagle, it's Miles Sanders.
This question about Lynn Bowden's interesting. And we talked about Tua throwing more. It's tough. They're not going to have as many plays against New England. New England slows the pace down. I'm concerned about Miami also slowing things down a little bit. They've only been sort of higher paced for 2 weeks and previously had played pretty slow with Tua. And then the other side of this is I like Lynn Bowden if Devontae Parker, well, really, I think it's more Jakeem Grant, but I think if any of those guys are missing, it's helpful for Bowden. It's Parker, Grant, and Gesicki, but they're all getting in limited practices. And if they all play, I think Bowden becomes pretty darn thin in a game that'll be slower paced.
Yeah, I do too. And it looks like they're both questionable, so we just don't know yet. But yeah, I agree. If they both go, I don't think he's really in play, but Bowden is a pretty solid prospect. And I think a much better prospect than people really think. Yep. He had an awesome 2018 season. He had, as a true sophomore in 2018, he had 36% of Kentucky's receiving yards, 38% of their touchdowns. He had a pretty solid 2019 prior to being forced to switch to quarterback because their quarterbacks went down, and he was like their only other option. And then he was drafted in the 3rd round, and he was a true underclassman coming in. He was only spent 3 years in college, broke out as a sophomore, gets drafted in the 3rd round.
And when he switched to QB, he ran for like freaking 1,400 yards or whatever it was.
Right. So you have the Raiders, who, as we know, are not like the best franchise in terms of like talent evaluation and kind of draft capital and all that stuff. They take him in the 3rd round and then just give up on him immediately because they see him as this like running back hybrid guy. But he seems to be like a legitimate wide receiver in Miami. And that is how he profiled. He profiled as like a very interesting high upside wide receiver prospect.
Slot guy who has really good yak ability, which that's why I brought up the rushing. Like I think he's good with the ball in his hands. I think he's really interesting for Dynasty, the way that he's closing the year.
Me too. Yeah. I think we've seen what we need to see from Dynasty. This guy has a pretty high ceiling long term. And I would be excited to play him if we get the opportunity to do it without it being just like really thin. Like you can't really, it just doesn't make sense with the, if Grant and Parker play, I don't think, but
yeah, especially against the Patriots where again, you're going to have some snaps expected to be lower or play volume as a team expected to be lower because they run the ball and they run the clock and that's just how they play. There's 2 sort of signalsy guys that I want to get your take on. We talked about Ayuk with Debo out, but Kendrick Bourne was in a huge role. I think he's sort of interesting. I'm going to probably go to him in a deep dynasty league. And then Dawson Knox has been just kind of shooting through the roof. We've talked a lot about like Cole Kmet, Jordan Akins. These guys, their roles have kind of bounced around a little bit. There's other tight ends involved. Knox seems locked into a really big role now where it's trended up, and he was at like 80% of routes this past week. He's gotten multiple green zone looks over the last like 3 weeks. Some of them are like little shovel passes from the one where they use him as like basically like running plays to get him touchdowns. Essentially, he's got a couple TDs off that kind of stuff. And you're talking about an offense that likes to pass a lot. I like, as far as tight ends in a really ugly tight end year and landscape right now, you have a fairly athletic tight end who's now running a lot more routes than he's been all year. He's getting some of the green zone work. The team's going to throw a lot. That's made Cole Beasley usable. Like Dawson Knox looks like he's a pretty viable option.
I agree. Yeah. I'll start with Knox because I'm more excited about Knox of the 2. And he jumped out to me basically since Tyler Kroft has been out of the lineup. Knox has been like a legitimate part of this offense. He's still not getting targeted on the season at a super high rate. 16% target per route run, not ideal. 5.9 yards per target, not really doing all that much with his targets, but he does seem to get used around the goal line, as he said, and that's important. And the Bills just throw a ton. So we're going to kind of take low, like small volume pieces from an offense. The Bills passing offense would be one of those that is enticing. But he's been more involved lately. Last week, he had a target per route run of 21%, running 72% of the routes. He had 67% of the routes in week 13. He had 61% in week 12. Both of those weeks, he had target per route run under 15%. So I wonder if there's a little bit of recency bias with him, but because he jumped out to me too, is starting to get more interesting. But as I look at the numbers, it's like he's still not that interesting, but he's a cheap way to get another piece of the Buffalo Bills passing game. And he should see, at least a few targets with Tyler Kroft out. Tyler Kroft, the last I checked, there's really no update on when he might be back. So we're going to probably see this through the end of the fantasy playoffs, this situation.
Yeah. So the counter I think I would make is Knox early in the year was only, because Kroft was there in part, was only running routes on like 30% of dropbacks at times in a few of these games. Then he gets hurt. He comes back. He runs at 55% in week 10. They go on bye week 11. And since coming out of the bye, it's 61%, 67%, 72%. So yeah, his targets per route run's been all over the place. I don't expect it to be elite by any means. I think Diggs is obviously going to generate so many targets that makes it tough for anyone else. But then Beasley clearly has a role in all of those things. But like when you say the recency bias thing, I think there's also something to be said about the expanding role, right? So like even if it's like part of my point isn't that I think his targets per out run will stay high. It's just that his routes are exploding, and there's enough routes in the offense and enough dropbacks in the offense that he hasn't played a lot of games over 70% routes. But if he continues to do that, even if he's a guy that hovers around 15% targets per out run, that's interesting for a tight end.
It is. Yeah, I think it's definitely interesting. Are we going to get John Brown this week?
Oh, we might. I don't know.
Because that would be the one thing. I'm not sure if Brown is going to be back.
Yeah.
That would potentially hurt him.
Yeah, that's true. It would make it harder for him to have a targets per out run over 15%. And that sort of is the cutoff. Like even if he's running a really high percentage of routes and running 30 plus routes in the game, like he did last week for the first time all year.
He's not. He's officially ruled out. Okay. So yeah, then I'm with you. I think just for the routes with a team that likes to throw a ton and they spread the offense out.
And he's got those plays in close where he could get, your touchdown luck. He's got that going for him as well. So,
yeah. And I think those routes, he'll be above 60%, which is, that's like when tight ends start to be like in play for me. If you see,
and he's only had a couple games like that so far.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's not anything that we've really seen from him. It's a projection that he could close a lot better than he's been all year. And last week, the 7 targets is, maybe not going to get 7 again, but he had previously had 4 as a high watermark for the year,
which was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, maybe the 7 is a sign of sort of a new normal where his target range, instead of being 3 or 4, is 5 to 7. And again, in a good passing offense where he's getting some red zone looks, that's good enough at tight end to be interesting, I think. So he's somebody you can mix in like DFS, like tomorrow, Saturday slate. Like I'm going to play some of him. I don't think he's going to be super high owned, even though there's only 2 games. And if you're in like a deep format, especially if you're in tight end premium or something, like I think you could start him in seasonal.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. For Kendrick Bourne, I have a harder time getting excited. I mean, he's definitely going to be out there a lot. And he has been out there a lot, though, at times throughout the year. He played above 80% of the snaps in week 1 and week 3, in week 8, which was his big week. And then last week he was at 89%. So, he's going to be playing a lot of snaps. He ran a route on 94% of dropbacks last week. That'll happen again, or close to it. But he's just not really a player that I think, 1, he's good at earning targets. And then 2, we haven't really seen him, except in pure desperation, San Francisco design stuff for him. Like, I think if they're going to design stuff for anybody, it'll be Ayuk. And if it's not Ayuk, maybe it's Richie James, So I don't know that Bourne is going to be getting any of the juicy stuff in this offense. And I don't think he's that good. So I just have a hard time thinking about playing Kendrick Bourne in any format.
Yeah, that's a good breakdown. I mean, I think I'm still going to have to use him in one league, but I was sort of excited about him for DFS, and after you said that, I'm probably not going to play. It's such a great matchup, but we also have talked about how the Niners could run 30 plus times in this game. So, yeah, I expect Ayuk to sort of dominate. I mean, because some of the counterpoint would be that like Kittle was active early in the year when he was playing those big snaps, right? And right now there are no Kittle, no Debo. They sort of need a second guy to step up. And last week was the first time that Bourne lately ran the big route share, right?
Yeah.
And he got 7 targets. And I kind of feel like he'll get 6 to 7 targets, but you're probably right that there's not like 10 target upside at all.
I don't think so. And Thorman has that as a pace down in his snaps.
Right.
It's like one of the like kind of the highlighted, like this is going to be a slog. So it's not a game where I want ancillary pieces anyway. I think that's something where it's like, hey, if you're excited about Ayuk, you're excited about Ayuk because he's going to capture a huge share of the passing offense. So even if it ends up being a little bit of a slog, he'll probably be okay. But any of these ancillary guys become a lot less interesting in that type of setup. All right, let's close with one of the guys I want to get your thoughts on, unless there's anything else pressing. But CEH, one of the things that jumped out to me from stealing signals was you're right up on the Chiefs and CEH and his snap share last week. Just that you're kind of like more positive than I was. And it's probably because I played CEH in DFS last week. And so I was stung by, the expected points not turning into real points. They're saying on the Swolecast that he was like the most Sklansky Bucks guy ever, right? And I think that's true. Just very frustrating. But you seem to be kind of optimistic, and now I'm wondering, like, well, hey, last week we had to go. There could be a bigger role than we expect, and I was talking about with Leone and I talked about this last week. We had to get two things right about CEH in order for him to be a good play in DFS, which is why he ultimately was not a good play last week. You had to get lucky that he had a bigger role than expected, and then you had to get lucky that he delivered efficiency on that role. I played him and I got lucky once that he got the role, but I did not get lucky on the second thing that he got the efficiency that he got in the end zone, which didn't happen. But now we're in a position maybe where we can expect the role, and we're just sort of hoping he gets lucky on efficiency. Does that make sense, or where are you at on him?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And I made that face sort of at you saying that he was a bad play. I think it was a fine play. You saw, I mean, I don't know.
You were breaking him down in relation to Jonathan Taylor, where it's like, well,
right.
Jonathan Taylor, we just need him to get lucky on the efficiency. We don't really need him to get lucky on the role.
Fair.
CEH, you had two. So I don't think he was a terrible play, but I was kicking myself for viewing them as similar plays when they probably really weren't.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. If you're looking at him in the context of the other rookie running backs, I'm actually like sort of least optimistic about CEH. But in the context of like what his role could be or what we were excited about in a Chiefs lead back all year, whatever, he did play a season high snap share, which is kind of crazy. Like earlier in the season, he was their clear lead back. He was playing 60% to 73% for the first 6 weeks. That was his range. Last week he played 74%. It was, very barely a season high, but a season high higher than any of those 6 games where he was more of a lead back. And since the Bell trade, he's been more in the 40 to 55 range, except for week 12, he gets up to 59. That was his last real active week because week 13 he was active but didn't play. And then week 14 comes back from that and plays 74%. The one thing I did say in signals, he didn't play in week 13. There could have been a possibility that they gave him some more run because they leaned heavily on Bell the last week, and it's sort of a fresh legs thing. So there's like some slight concern that we don't see him stick at 74, 75% or go higher. But it was nice to see him get out there, play that much, run a route on 59% of dropbacks, see 6 targets, catch 5 balls. All those things are very promising. I have a hard time with him in a couple of respects. One is there is some concern that ticks back because it was a season high sort of out of nowhere. He hasn't been really close to it recently, and he had the week off before, so maybe they were doing a fresh legs thing. And then the second respect is Kansas City has been so pass heavy lately, and Mahomes has been so good. Their offense is almost entirely just Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and no one can stop that right now. They don't even need Sammy Watkins or Demarcus Robinson or no other Chief is getting these random touchdowns that we've seen in the past. We're not seeing the random big plays from Mecole Hardman, none of it, because they're just doing everything through Mahomes, Hill, and Kelce. And if that's working, you're not gonna fix that. Like, if it isn't broke.
Yeah, and Leone had the same point here that it could have just been after the rest week they gave him a heavy week, and then they could go back to the split. So yeah, it's like it's not a comfortable play, but you could be in a game like this game could shoot out, right? We've got Brees coming back. I don't know if that's like necessarily going to lead to a ton of scoring, but probably a better chance of a shootout now with Brees back than with Taysom, right?
But Michael Thomas is out, right? I don't like that.
No. Yeah, so let's see. 27.5 implied total for Kansas City. I mean, if you're getting still, it's like, I guess it'll come down to me for ownership, right? Because if you got a chance to get at a pretty cheap price this week, $5,800 for CH on DraftKings, 27.5 team total for Patrick Mahomes running back, and there's a chance, as we saw last week, he has 70+% of the snaps. Could be pretty good. But you don't seem sold.
No, I was sorry. I was reading a Roto World blurb, so my reaction was not to you because I barely heard what you said. We're an hour and 45 minutes, and Ben's starting to read other stuff during the show.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think I was not delivering a very sharp point anyway. Basically, I'm going to be thinking about playing CEH until 12:59 on Sunday. I'll tell you that. So
nice. I mean, I don't think it's a horrible play if he's at a lower ownership. Like I think there are paths still to us seeing what we wanted from CEH earlier in the year. He's had some big running games. Like there's no reason why CEH couldn't have a 25-point game before the end of the season, the regular season, or even in the playoffs. So yeah, like going back to that and thinking he's the next one to do the Jonathan Taylor stuff I wouldn't tell you that's bad at all. It would be a kind of a thin GPP play, sure, but like it could happen.
I'm curious how many targets. Here's Pete is out. Pete just checks back in. I think Pete's been gone and just checked back in when he saw it was an hour and 45 minutes. I wonder how many targets Leone has for Kamara with Thomas out, right? And Brees back. Like it could just get a little nutty. Could get nutty for Kamara this week.
Whatever it is, he'll defend it to the death. He loves his
All right. Leone, he may have left. His bid is that he's never leaving, but I think he might be gone. But we can close it out. Check out Stealing Signals. Follow Ben on Twitter at YardsPerGretch. Check out and you guys are still going. 9.4
targets. There it is.
9.4 targets.
And yes, ST Gabriel Davis, upside wide receiver 3. Yeah. Should we talk about Gabriel Davis for a half an hour?
Yeah, let's talk about Gabriel Davis. Just kidding. We're going to go. I'll be back Monday for Stat Chasing. We'll be back Wednesday for Ship Chase, and then we'll be right back here for Chasing Signals next Friday at 4 and the outro.